A Lantern, Chapter 28. And now war again. War, spreading its fear and heartaches like the circling ripples of a wave to the most remote farms beyond the tiniest village. And in the old farmhouse behind the cedars, Abby was to say goodbye to young Dr. Fred Baker and Stanley Deal, her two oldest grandsons, looking big and fine in their khaki. You know, Grandma, from the time Germany ran over little Belgium, you wouldn't want us to stand by and let a bully. Yes, the words came back. The same words, the same spirit. How the clock hands went round. She saw them drive down the lane road, saw them turn at the big gate, through which they had so often come to play, and wave their khaki hats gaily. The wind was blowing from the east, and the cedars went before it, blowing from the east like the breath of the war god. And Fred and Stanley were waving their hats gaily back to her, while the cedars bent and the wind blew from the east. They were like her own boys marching off to war. Children of her children, she loved them as she loved their parents. Did a woman never get over loving? Deep love brought relatively deep heartaches. Why could not a woman of her age, whose family was raised, relinquish the hold upon her emotions? Why could she not have a peaceful old age, wherein there entered neither great affection nor its comrade, great sorrow? She had seen old women who seemed not to care as she was caring, whose emotions seemed to have died with their youth. Could she not be one of them? For a long time she stood in the window and looked at the cedars, twisting before the east wind like so many helpless women writhing under the call from the east. All during those following strenuous months, she felt almost as though the very outcome of the struggle depending on the GAR Hall, bought a Liberty Bond whenever she could, and conserving everything, ate frugally and prayed that right would prevail. Fate willed that Dr. Fred Baker Jr. and Stanley Deal would come back to their people from overseas. Young Dr. Fred went into partnership with his father immediately, and Stanley, after a 3-month period of recuperation, took back his old job at the bank. Grace was teaching now in Wesleyan University. Life was still real and life was still earnest to Grace, splitting an infinitive on one of its cardinal sins. At 30, she received her second proposal of marriage from one of the younger college professors and refused him. Abby was deeply concerned about it. "Are you quite certain, Grace, that you don't love him?" "Quite certain, Mother." Grace was airily sure of herself. "But, Grace, you're 30, even if you don't look it." "Yes, I'm 30, Mother, and thank you for the implied compliment." "Of course, if you don't love him. But he is such a nice man. And you're being 30. Abby's voice trailed off uncertainly. Grace laughed. "Can't you conceive of a woman being happy, Mother, without a man at her heels?" "But Grace, it's so natural, so normal." "Well, that sort of thing doesn't appeal to me." "That sort of thing? Why, Grace, it's the finest thing in the world when it's the right man." Grace was impatient. "See here, Mother, I have my life all mapped out and a man doesn't figure into it. I want to be free and independent. I want to do more research work in the East, and I'm perfectly satisfied with my lot. I have at present 120 students in my classes, a large number of whom are fitting themselves to be teachers. If 2/3 of them go out to teach, that will be 80 new instructors. They, in time, will teach an average of 40 students each, and the result is I have directly and indirectly influenced 3,200 students. "For goodness sakes, Grace," Abby said in exasperation, "you sound like government statistics." And so Grace was not to be married, and the pearls would still lie in the velvet box waiting for a Mackenzie bride. But if there were no romance in the world for Grace, the little winged god was not without its victims in the Deal clan. For Stanley Deal and Dr. Fred Baker Jr. were both married the same year. Stanley to an Omaha girl, popular in the younger set, as the papers unanimously agreed, and young Dr. Fred to a red-headed nurse with whom he had worked during the days in camp before going overseas. The year that John was elected to the legislature, Mac was made a vice president of his bank. John was 48, tall, straight, his black hair showing 2 silver patches above the ear. his whole physique always reminding Abby of his father. Mac was 53, and a bird's-eye view of him standing east and west, if the spectator chanced to be looking north, would resemble nothing in the world so much as one of the portly pigeons around his mother's old hayloft. He wore horn-rimmed glasses, went in for golf and Rotary and the commercial club, freely paid his church and associated charity subscriptions, thought a great deal of his first wife, who was also his last, and altogether was so decent and clean and so respected in the rather nervous business world that he would have made an ideal target for the shots of any of the most weightily important and worldly devastating of the critics of our social structure. Abby took Lincoln, Omaha, and Chicago papers, and with the same scissors that cut out their homemade clothes, carefully cut out every item concerning her now rather well-known children. Sometimes she would run across one which gave her a few moments of almost wicked glee. One such was, perhaps more through the influence of Mackenzie Deal than any other single person, this series of Shakespearean plays is being brought to Omaha. For a few moments Abby saw, in retrospect, a freckle-faced boy in a sod house hunching over a thick volume of plays and saying, "Aw, what's the sense in this?" "Dear, dear," she said to herself, "there is a divinity which shapes our ends, rough hew them how we will." After a year, Dr. Fred Baker Jr. and his wife were parents of a sturdy son. Dr. Fred Sr. and Margaret were grandparents. Abby was a great-grandmother. Where had the time gone? Blown by the wind she could not stop. Ticked off by the hand she could not stay. Tourists were flocking back now into war-torn Europe, and one spring Grace began making plans to go abroad in the summer. She was 33 now, only 4 years younger than my mother was when she made the journey from Illinois, Abby thought. And Mother looked old enough to be her mother, if not her grandmother. What was the secret of it, she wondered. One Friday night in April, buds bursting into pink froth on the peach trees, and the April moon caught in the top of a Lombardy poplar, Grace arrived home unexpectedly. "Well, well, it's my baby." Abby was delighted as she was surprised. Life was full of nice things. Grace, too, was happy to see her mother. "And why do you think I came?" She was sparkling, vivacious. "You've got a beau," Abby guessed right away. "You're not, oh, Grace, you're not going to be married." "Oh, Mother," Grace laughed lightheartedly. "You're incorrigibly romantic, aren't you?" "Heavens, no. How you would enjoy tying me down for life. No, it's something about you." "About me?" "Yes." She seemed fairly exuding mystery and excitement. "I never could guess, Grace." "You're going abroad with me." "Oh, no." Abby was incredulous. "I don't think I could, Grace." "You don't think I could, do you?" "I certainly do. You know, Mother, I got to thinking about it in school, and you're going, too. We'll take it very slowly. You're pretty well, you know, for a woman of your age. It just came to me as suddenly as a flash. Why couldn't Mother go, too? I didn't write it because I was too anxious to talk it over with you. You will have to decide right away on account of reservations." My! Grace!" Abby could not quite face the reality of the plan. "Listen, Mother, how would you like to see the green coast of Ireland?" My! In moments of great emotion, Abby's words were few. "And London Tower." Quite suddenly, to Abby Deal, from somewhere out of the past, there came a haunting melody. Its lilting notes wove in and out of the magical things Grace was saying. She could not quite catch its refrain, and the words, too, evaded her. In and out of her mind it danced with elfish glee, a little half-memory, something about having gold and having land. And to go to Scotland and look up the old Mackenzie estate. My! That old refrain. It seemed to come to her out of the night. And Stratford-on-Avon with Anne Hathaway's cottage. My! Little half-memory singing tantalizingly. It flickered ahead of her, a will-o'-the-wisp from out of the past, beckoning her to come and do this thing. She could not place it, could not catch it. Whether song or poem, story or scene, she was not sure. She only knew it was something mostly joyous, but a little sad. Bewildered, incredulous, undecided, she went to bed. "Well, what do you think?" "I think it would be fine." All night she turned and tossed with the excitement and the responsibility of the decision. Once she got up and rubbed liniment on her knees. Toward morning she slept, but fitfully. When she made her kitchen fire and cooked breakfast, all the high enthusiasm of the evening before had vanished. She hated to meet Grace and break the news, dreaded to see the eager interest fade from her face. As soon as Grace came down the old enclosed stairway, Abby told her, "Grace, I can't go." "Why, Mother? I thought last night you would." "No, I can't, Grace. But you don't know how I appreciate your thinking of it and wanting me. Don't I realize how much easier it would be for you to get around without me? Well, that makes me appreciate it all the more. It's one of the nicest, if not the very nicest thing you ever did for me, to come home to talk it over. But I can't go." "I think you're making a mistake, Mother. I'm quite sure you could get through the trip all right." "No, Grace. I'm more disappointed than you can ever realize. I'm so disappointed that I almost wish you hadn't put it into my head. Isn't that childish? Last night I couldn't sleep for thinking about it. I was that excited. But when I woke up this morning from a little nap I had, I knew I couldn't go. I have pains in my knees sometimes until the tears come, and my spells of asthma are coming a little closer. I'm tied to a whole row of little bottles on top of the pantry shelf. You wouldn't want me to have a spell of asthma in front of the Louvre or have to sit down on the Bridge of Sighs because I was all out of breath. It wouldn't be appropriate somehow. All the time my heart tells me to go, my mind says not. Desire says one thing and good sense another. I thought you would love it so. Oh, Grace, I would when I was younger. How I would. Things just don't connect sometimes. When I was young, I had no means or time, and now I have the means and time, I have no youth. Well, I don't want to be responsible about urging you against your judgment, of course, but I'm certainly sorry. I said to myself, I'll get half of my enjoyment from seeing Mother's enthusiasm. Thank you, dearie, for the thought, but I'll stay home and read about the trip. You write me from all the places you stop, and I'll just stay in my chair and travel with you. And if anybody could take a trip that way, I know I can, for I've always thrilled over reading travels. Grace was loath to accept the decision. As I said, I'm sorry. You owe it to yourself if you possibly can go. Your life has been so narrow, Mother. Just here, all the time. You ought to get out now and see things. Unwittingly, as so often she did, Grace had hurt her mother's feelings. For a moment, Abby nursed her little hurt, and then she said quietly, You know, Grace, it's queer, but I don't feel narrow. I feel broad. How can I explain it to you so you would understand? I've seen everything, and I've hardly been away from this yard. I've seen cathedrals in the snow on the Lombardy poplars. I've seen the sunset behind the Alps, over there when the clouds have been piled up on the edge of the prairie. I've seen the ocean billows in the rise and the fall of the prairie grass. I've seen history in the making, 3 ugly wars flare up and die down. I've sent a lover and 2 brothers to one, a son and son-in-law to another, and 2 grandsons to the other. I've seen the feeble beginnings of a raw state in the civilization that developed there, and I've been a part of the beginning and a part of the growth. I've married and borne children and looked into the face of death. Is childbirth narrow, Grace, or marriage, or death? When you've experienced all those things, Grace, the spirit has traveled although the body has been confined. I think travel is a rare privilege, and I'm glad you can have it. But not everyone who stays at home is narrow, and not everyone who travels is broad. I think if you can understand humanity, can sympathize with every creature, can put yourself into the personality of everyone, you're not narrow, you're broad. Rather strangely, Grace was neither antagonistic nor argumentative. You know, Mother, there's something to that thought. And another thing, Mother, do you know there's something about you at times that is sort of majestic and poetical? I believe if you had ever done anything with it, you might have written. No, Abby Deal said wistfully. No, I was only meant to appreciate it, not to do it. At the close of the day, Abby went contentedly to bed. Her head was heavy, her limbs ached. It seemed a little hard to breathe, but a warm feeling of comfort was upon her, that she was to stay in the quiet backwater of her own home. I'm not going, Will. That's too bad, Abby. It would have been wonderful. I know it would, Will, but you understand how it is. I understand, Abby girl. I knew you would. Whenever I tell you things, Will, I always know you'll understand.